Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's edition of In the Know, our webinar series brought to you by the RSL and Services Clubs Association. My name is Gary Gibson, and I'm the CEO of the association, and I welcome all of you here today to our topic, staff redundancies and how to manage them. Now, we have three excellent presentations for you today, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A. If you have, if you have any questions, down the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. If you have a question, please type in those questions on the Q&A box, and I will present them to each of the presenters and get them to respond. We'll try and answer questions after each presentation, but if there's quite a few of them, we might need to wait till the end when we've had all three presentations before we do further Q&A. So please make sure you make use of that Q&A. Now, this session is recorded as well and will be loaded up onto our website so from tomorrow. So if any of your other colleagues or your board directors or anyone else you feel should see this, wants to see it, you can download it off the association's website, and we will be sending out that link to everyone who's registered today for this webinar. So everyone will have a chance to do that. Now, in the last few days, last week, we had some advice from the Prime Minister that thankfully the JobKeeper program was going to be extended beyond the 28th of September when it was originally scheduled to finish. And that was welcome news to many small businesses and medium-sized businesses who have been keeping quite a few staff on their books just through the JobKeeper program. Now, there have been some changes in the way in which that will operate, and some businesses may no longer be eligible for it. But at least I think it does provide us with a chance to keep more staff on our books. But the reality is that the financial circumstances and the business performance in the club industry across New South Wales and other jurisdictions demonstrates that clubs will need to have to make some hard decisions about the continuity of all of their team. It's a terrible concept, and we know we don't want to make people redundant. That's the worst option that we have. But the reality is, if we're going to keep our businesses solvent, we may well need to make those hard decisions. And so today's session, where we have three excellent presentations, we'll talk to you about the processes you need to undertake in examining your finances and looking at your legal requirements and obligations. And then how do you look after those people if you have had to make staff redundant? What is your responsibilities to try and support them in that process? So today we have three presentations from Greg Russell, the Managing Director of Russell Corporate Advisory, Jonathan Corlett, who is a partner in Thompson Gear Lawyers, and we welcome a new partner today, Greg Weiss from Career 365, who is an outplacement advisor and expert, and he will be speaking as our third presenter. But firstly, I'd like to welcome Greg Russell. I'll just take my slides down and invite Greg Russell to put his slides up. And Greg will talk about the financial examinations that you need to be making. Greg, you're on mute still. Take yourself off mute.
Sorry, I was thinking that one of the new skills that people had learnt in COVID was lip reading. So for those who could, I apologise for repeating myself. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. The COVID drama unfortunately continues, and I guess one of the questions that we all face is, well, what is normal? And I guess the new normal is that everything is uncertain. We're never now sure of what tomorrow is. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about the new normal, what we may have learnt in the period since we've reopened on the 1st of June, And then looking into that a bit further in terms of the redundancy issue, can we then be efficient and still meet the objectives of our club? And what does it mean for, pardon me, KPIs into the future? So that's just the broad structure that I'm going to follow, and hopefully it will give you some insight into certainly what I'm seeing. I guess the really unusual thing is that we're talking about the potential for redundancies in an environment where there are a number of clubs who have had absolute outstanding results achieved on a financial basis in June. Some record profits, some very unusual revenues, some large growth in revenue, but we're here talking about the context of what is the new normal, and also considering redundancies, but in the light of these profits. I guess one of the things that you have to look at is what's driving those profits. And on the second point on this slide, business survival will depend on efficiency. We've generally opened into a very efficient business model because many of the costs that we would normally incur as a club have not been present, and we've been able to continue to trade without those costs being present because of the way we've opened, and there's certain aspects of the club's business that have just not reopened. What it's shown is that we really can't afford to carry excess capacity, and what we're seeing in some of these results, obviously, is there's the buoyancy given by the government support, which has no doubt contributed to some of the extraordinary results we've achieved in some venues. And I should just emphasise that what I'm saying may not be uniformly experienced. There are some that have not seen outstanding results in June. There are some that have not seen exceptional growths in revenue. I should acknowledge that it is very much a patchwork of results, but generally the clubs that have set themselves up well for opening, planned for opening, and gone about it in a very business-like manner are generally seeing pretty good results. We've learnt that excess capacity is something that we really can't carry, and that lesson is going to be even pushed further once we see the impacts of JobKeeper. JobKeeper has certainly been a good thing for our economy and our community, and certainly for our employees. But that's going to potentially change for many clubs in the not too distant future. So that focus on not having excess capacity is going to become more important as we move toward the later part of the year. And I guess the other thing that is part of the new normal is that we need to be flexible, flexible in every way. If you look at the last couple of weeks in Sydney, I think we were all starting to feel a little bit positive. People were socialising more, things were starting to build and perhaps head toward what was a previously normal social environment. But that's all now starting to show some cracks, and there's already been a number of venues that have had to react to infections in their environment, and they've had to do that very quickly. One example, one large club had to stand down 100 staff because of the risk of a COVID infection in their venue, and they had to contact 900 people who were potentially in the venue, asking them to self-isolate. So, yeah, would you have planned for that? Could you have planned for that? Well, now you probably say you could, and you should. The inevitability of something like that happening, I think we just have to accept that one day it could happen in our own venue, and purely by accident. So our plans, whatever they are focused on, need to be flexible, and they need to cater for change. We have a government that is prepared to make quick and significant decisions that will severely impact us, or can severely impact us, not in any vexatious way, but only because their primary focus is on community health and stopping this virus as best as it can be stopped, and limiting the harm that it does to families and people. So we have to have that capacity to be very nimble and very quick in our response, and carrying excess capacity in a labour sense is something that we can't really tolerate. So I think we're going to see, and we are already seeing, a number of clubs look at their efficiency and how they maintain a labour cost efficiency. Many have already started down the process of looking at a restructure and a review of their operations. And we've had a number of clubs go through a voluntary redundancy program and then forced redundancies. And there's a variety of them that are in various stages of progress. But I think the lesson that we've learnt is that we can be a very efficient operation. So I'll talk a little bit more about KPIs down the track, but the way we've opened has, I think, given us some insight into what a club's business is capable of doing. But maybe some would say we're not currently doing what clubs would typically do in our support for community and other sport. Sorry, my slide's not, there it is. So I've already mentioned that there are redundancies in play already in clubs. The permanent workforce is potentially at risk of becoming less permanent. Middle management particularly, probably the target areas. And I know that's not something that we relish, because let's face it, the club industry is very much a community, and the people that are in the business are people that we've worked with generally for some time and have some great respect and affinity for. So this process is not going to be easy. But unfortunately, the way the world is down the track, we have to look at the survival of the business and putting it in the best position we can. So the redundancy question is something that we have to consider. Is there a way to make our business leaner and more reactive than it has been historically? So when we're considering redundancies, obviously that's going to impact on profit, because they're not a provision, they're not provided for in your P&L on a monthly basis like annual leave and long service leave. So they will be a hit to profit, but they'll also be a hit to cash flow. And obviously the issue to plan for is the cash flow requirements that are needing to be met down that path. So cash forecasting and planning is part of looking at the restructuring of the workforce, and that's my personal view about it becoming a less permanent workforce. It'd be interesting to see what the other presenters have to say on that, which is an unfortunate fact of life. It's not something that I think any of us really want or encourage, but I think that's just the way the businesses will react. Just a final point on cash flow and profit. The profit and loss account won't be affected by people that are paid out their annual leave entitlements or long service leave, because that's already been an expense in the profit and loss account. So that is one small relief, if that is a relief, but it still impacts on cash flow. So the world that I'm seeing is one that is needing to be reset. There is a new balance to be struck in how a club operates. So rethinking strategy, rethinking what our future plans are, where we're heading as an organisation. We need to consider the club's constitution in how we reset our plans and how we focus our business. I always talk about financial viability. It's not a presentation from me without me mentioning it somewhere. The underlying requirement for every business is to be financially viable. We in the club industry have a conundrum, because we are not driven by absolute profit. There is a trade-off between what we do for the community and meeting the requirements of our constitution and our objects and profit. But in this current early period post-COVID, I think our primary focus is going to have to be on financial viability, get the business settled, and see if we can establish what a new norm is. And part of the changes that will happen in establishing that new norm will be, I guess, the compression of the industry further at an accelerated rate. Now, a lot will say, some of that might be a bit negative given the results that are being achieved, but the question that I have is how long those results can be achieved for. And I'd love to hear from anyone that has a real identification of where those profits are generally coming from and how long they will be sustainable. There's interesting theories around it, and it's not subject matter today to go through that, but real question mark in how long we can sustain some of the extraordinary results that are being achieved. So that leaves me at the point of, well, what is our long-term revenue? Part of the issue with addressing redundancies is reducing fixed costs and making things more variable and therefore more responsive to changes in our business, and some of these changes may be forced upon us. Questions need to be considered in terms of margins. What is now an acceptable margin? We have some old language about gross profit, and most of us would target a early 60% gross profit in beverage and possibly food. They need to be reconsidered in the context of our new businesses and probably lifted. We also need to provide for potentially an increase in our labour costs as a result of the requirement for hygiene. So I think we need to reset our EBITDA targets, re-establish what is an acceptable number. We need to reset our wages percentages and have a new set of targets created. Reset the margins on the basis of really eliminating the cost sinks, making everything a revenue contributor where it can be. So really setting a whole new page of expectations in terms of KPIs. I think it's still early days to finalise what those KPIs might look like, but I'd be certainly encouraging people in the last quarter of this year to be having a good look at the business and resetting those KPIs and being prepared to put a line through what was historically acceptable. Some of the EBITDA numbers that were achieved in June were in the high 30s and early 40s, and I'm not silly enough to suggest you should be targeting those as long-term sustainable, but it does highlight what some of our businesses are capable of producing in the right circumstances. Isn't quite the language that I was wanting to use, but in circumstances where it's only the things that contribute to profit that are in play. We probably should have some new KPIs in the business as well, because we're having to turn over our spaces more often, particularly in catering. Other KPIs around how we deal with venue caps that are probably going to be part of our life in the medium term. New KPIs for cleaning frequency and efficiency. So there's a whole new lot of planning to do, both at a business planning level and also at a strategic level. We need to really reset where we're going in the future. The fundamental part of this presentation is about redundancies, and I think when you look at labour costs as being one of the big components in the cost of running a club, that's going to be one of the things that is in play in terms of how we make our workforce responsive and efficient. You do need to have a dynamic forecasting tool, which again is a catch cry that I keep flogging, but you need to have some perspective of what the future is if you're going to make an informed business decision. There's a lot more to say about redundancies and how the business will reshape, and I think as we get down the track a little bit further, particularly in the next month or two or three, we'll be able to be a little bit more certain about what the future should look like. I think that's my time up, Gary.
No, well, thank you very much, Greg. A very comprehensive presentation, as always. I think the key to the message, there's a number of key messages in yours, but the one thing I was taking out was the fact that we need to be able to build a flexible business program so that we can plan for whatever might happen. The reality is, if we look at what's happened in Victoria and what is now, still happening across New South Wales, is we do not know how this virus is going to go and what impact it's going to have on businesses, and we need to be able to respond pretty quickly to situations, and that means a flexible business environment and a flexible workforce environment. So thank you very much, Greg. I might ask you to take your slides down now, and I'll invite our next presenter, who is Jonathan Corlett, a partner at Thompson Gear, who is, I'm not sure how I describe you, Jonathan, an expert in redundancies and in what we're talking about today. But as everyone will know, Thompson Gear is a foundation partner of the association, and we welcome Jonathan's participation today. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Gary. So just in terms of my background, I'm a partner with the firm specialising in employment law. So part of my remit does include redundancies. And to be honest, it hasn't come as a surprise to me that I've been asked to present on this topic, the legal requirements of redundancies. I have noticed an uptick in these type of queries in recent times. Just so to give you a bit of context, my experience in the early part of the pandemic impact on not just clubs but other clients of mine is that a lot of organisations were just trying to see what was going to happen, see how long the pandemic was around for, and to try and avoid making fairly dramatic decisions that might have permanent consequences such as redundancies. It was an issue that was discussed, but it was an option. And obviously there was a desire to provide a degree of stability to employees who were facing a number of other issues with their lives, not just with regard to their employment. In recent times, particularly in light of the second wave that has ravaged Victoria, what I've found is that a lot of organisations are now starting to focus on, well, what next? What do we need to do? We thought that this might be over by now, but we need to start making actual decisions about what we're going to look like in the future in order to try and ensure long-term viability. So what I'll be talking about today is sort of trying to limit it to these 4 points. What is a redundancy? Justifying redundancies, and that's what I sort of refer to as developing a business case, which Greg has sort of spoken to, and that type of information is obviously important to develop such business cases. The process requirements, what boxes need to be ticked in order to ward off claims by employees, and then finally the benefits that employees receive when they are made redundant, when their employment is terminated by reason of redundancy, I should say. Now, this passage is from a 1977 judgment of the South Australian Supreme Court. It's referred to as a classic definition, not just by me, but by judges and other types over the last 43 years. It's the go-to definition of what is the essence of a redundancy. So I'll just read it out and then we'll unpack it. The job becomes redundant when the employer no longer desires to have it performed by anyone. A dismissal for redundancy seems to be a dismissal not on account of any personal act or default of the employee dismissed or consideration peculiar to him. Just side note, this is the 1977 case I'll point out. But because the employer no longer wishes the job the employee has been doing to be done by anyone. So you can see from the definition that the focus is on the job. It's not on the employee. It's not about how the employee performs or behaves. One caveat that I put to that is if you're looking at reducing the number of similar or employees in similar roles, those type of factors can be used as a selection criteria, but that's the extent of it. The focus is on the job. Now, redundancies generally arise in the context of changing operational requirements, and they include introduction of major changes regarding organisation, structure or technology. And the last point, the technology, implementation of new technology. For instance, we don't see toll collectors on the Sydney Harbour Bridge or other tollways anymore because of the introduction of that e-tag technology a number of years ago. Now, obviously, I think that it's very important to develop a rationale for what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, what problems you're trying to correct. And this is what I call about developing a business case that will lead to workplace change and redundancy. It might not always lead to redundancy, but that tends to lead to redundancies. Given the costs that are associated with implementing changes, particularly the costs of making employees redundant, there's a clear desire to avoid a trial and error approach. So the development of a robust business case early on is important to set out the roadmap for where you're looking at heading. From my perspective, and this is in the context of defending people facing claims or organisations facing claims. It's also very useful having a business case that sets out the clear justification for what you're looking at doing. So that identifies the objective basis for why you have decided to implement changes to your organisation. And the point that the last point that I make there, I can't emphasise it enough. It's really important to document, at least in the sense of defending a claim. Documentary evidence is far superior to witness evidence because the documents really don't, they aren't affected by poor memory or things like that. They show what was happening at the time that you were looking at developing the business case. Now, my general recommendation when we're looking at developing a business case, and I've assisted clients with this in the past, a fairly simple way of doing it is having a proposal, a written proposal that's prepared by perhaps lower levels of management designed to be provided to higher levels of management or even to a board of directors, which sets out what the issue is you're looking at addressing, what changes you're proposing, and perhaps what costs are associated with the changes that you're looking at doing. Again, this is likely to form the basis of that decision, and if it does, it can also be used as evidence in subsequent cases that might be brought by employees who are upset about being let go. In terms of process requirements, I again take the view that, well, what type of claims can you potentially face, and what's the best way of defending those claims? And the most obvious claim if an employee is dismissed is bringing an unfair dismissal claim under the Fair Work Act. Now, helpfully, from the point of view of what I'm talking about, a genuine redundancy is actually a full defence to an unfair dismissal claim, and it's set out in the Fair Work Act. It sets out three elements, which I've set out there briefly. The first element, this is a derivative of the classic definition that I referred to earlier. No longer required employee's job to be performed by anyone because of changes in the operational requirements of the employer's enterprise. So hopefully, having the business case and having it in a documented form, that will satisfy that element fairly quickly. The second element is the need to comply with consultation provisions under applicable industrial instruments. Now, a lot of you out there are going to be subject to the Registered and Licensed Clubs Award. Some of you might have your own enterprise agreements. Whatever it is, that's what you need to have regard to and what the consultation provisions say with respect to that. Can I say, even if my experience is that even if an organisation's had a fairly good justification for making people redundant, this second element's the one where they fall down most of the time. They either don't have sufficient regard to the consultation obligations, or they're not aware of them. So what I'll be doing shortly is just going through the consultation obligation provisions from that particular award. And the third element is considering employees for redeployment. The main focus is on available positions that you might have within your organisation or with associated entities. There's not an obligation to create jobs, so and it's not reasonable for, if you have an available job that might be, say, an accountant, but you're letting some bar staff go. It's not, well, depending on the qualification of the bar staff, it's not reasonable necessarily to be able to simply shift the person into that area. And they're factors that the Fair Work Commission will take into account. Obviously, there's also, well, not obviously, but there's not a need to create jobs. I think that would probably defeat the whole purpose of going through redundancies in the first place. Now, in terms of the provisions under the Registered and Licensed Clubs Award, I've set out in this slide and the next slide the main points. I've distilled the points down. I haven't just reproduced what's set out there, so I'll go through those quickly now. The first one there is give notice to all employees who may be affected by a definite decision to introduce major changes in production, program, organisation, structure, or technology and their representatives. Now, that last one, not notifying representatives if they have them, is an area where I've seen some organisations fall over. If you are aware that your employees are members of unions, notify the unions. You might not want to deal with the unions, but I've had experience where the unions have become aware of what's happened and have tripped up employees trying to get through the consultation process. So I think it's important to do that. If you're not aware of employees being members of any unions, my recommendation is to ask the employees, are they a member of a union to whom they would like the employer to notify. The second point there is discuss with the employees and their representatives if they have any, the introduction of the changes, the likely effect on the employees. And I think the most obvious one in the context of what we're talking about here is dismissal, and measures to avoid or reduce the adverse effects of the change on the employees. So the requirement to consider employees for redeployment, which is part of a defence to an unfair dismissal claim, I think is also important in being able to discharge this obligation as well. So I would suggest that going into notifying the employees, you actually consider what other roles there might be available. There might not be any roles available, but at least you can sort of point to this if anybody ever challenges you that consideration wasn't done. And then finally for this slide, the obligation to give notice and start discussions must commence as soon as practicable after a definite decision has been made. Now, decisions of the Fair Work Commission don't really go into exactly what time frame that involves. But I think it's fairly clear it's not a matter of sitting on your hands once a definite decision has been made, unless there's some compelling, perhaps commercial reason to keep things under wraps for a period of time. But if that's the case, you need to justify that for the Fair Work Commission if that aspect is ever challenged. Now, the next point, even if employees are aware of the obligation to consult under relevant awards, this is the one where I find that a number of employees still fall down, and that's the requirement to provide all relevant information about the changes in writing to the employees and their representatives. The provision, the consultation clause in the award refers to, this must include things about the nature of the changes, the expected effect on the employees, and any other matters likely to affect employees. But it makes the exception of confidential information if that disclosure is contrary to the employer's interests. When I'm advising clients, what I tend to focus on is, okay, well, let's prepare for consulting with the employees. So let's prepare perhaps a short page or page and a half letter, which deal with things like, this is what we're looking at doing. This is the likely impact that we think. We've considered you for redeployment, but we can't see any other options. If there's any suggestions you'd like to make, please let us know. Please come to us with any suggestions or questions that you might have. If we confirm, the introduction of this change, this is the likely benefits that you'll have. Now that can be set out in, I have included that type of detail in a page and a half, maybe 2 pages of letter. But I haven't had any, touch wood, haven't had any issues with people saying that's insufficient written notification of what is happening. And then the final point, the final obligation that employers have in dealing with these, with a consultation provision under the award is the employer must promptly consider any matters raised by employees or their representatives. Now, the cases of the Fair Work Commission sort of pretty well set out that it's not a matter of ticking a box here and saying, okay, well, we've gone through that. We're not listening to what the employees are saying. We'll just simply go through. So it's not a matter of dismissing what employees have to raise out of hand. But equally, there's not an obligation either on the employer to just accept and adopt what is raised by employees. My recommendation in responding to employees is to thoughtfully and reasonably just go through perhaps why the thing that we've suggested is not going to work out in this current situation. I've once had a situation where an employee asked to be put into a new role that they didn't have. In the way they responded, that was saying, sorry, but we don't have that role available, and they're not looking at creating that role. So I think it's a matter of dealing with people in a professional and understanding manner, because we are looking at the end of their employment in a lot of situations when they're starting this consultation process. What I'll finally talk about is the benefits that employees are entitled to on being made redundant. Notice of termination or payment in lieu. This will be set out in the National Employment Standard, which is set out in the Fair Worker. Sometimes industrial instruments such as the award or enterprise agreements might have a different level of notice. So regards needs to be given to what the relevant industrial instruments set about that as well. And also any individual employment contract that the employee might have, because the employee will be entitled to the higher of any of those levels of benefit that they have under those three different sources of regulation. Employees will also be entitled to payment in lieu of accrued untaken annual leave, and in some circumstances, long service leave if they qualify. In New South Wales, under the Long Service Leave Act, an employee is entitled to have their long service leave paid out, even if they're not there for 10 years and able to take long service leave. If they've been there for at least 5 years, they get a pro-rata portion of that entitlement. Finally, the other main entitlement that is set out is redundancy pay. Again, it's set out in the National Employment Standard, and I'll be going to that in my next slide. But it also might be set out in the enterprise agreement or under an employment contract. And again, whichever is higher is the limit applies in that case. And my final point there is there might be some other benefit that's set out in your particular enterprise agreement or the employee's employment contract. I have had experience in the past where employees have missed this and the employees have made a claim for some additional entitlement, maybe some higher level of redundancy pay. So it's very important to check these instruments before you finalise what you're going to be providing to the employees. An example of something additional that I've seen in a lot of enterprise agreements is the provision of outplacement services. Now, this is the redundancy pay table under the National Employment Standards. Just briefly, we'll go through each of those rows, but person's been there for less than 12 months. They're not entitled to any redundancy pay. And I'll point out row 10, that's not an error. It does go back to 12 weeks after 10 years of service. I won't bore you with the detail of them to say that for some reason 10 or 15 years ago the Fair Work Commission thought that there needed to be a factor in of the interaction with long service leave benefits, which generally kicked in at 10 years, hence the reduction to that. The other point I was remiss in not saying at the top, these are benefits that permanent part-time or full-time staff get. Casual employees are not generally entitled to things like notice of termination or redundancy pay in the circumstances. Again, that might depend on your particular enterprise for their contracts of employment. Thank you for your time today. I hope you've found some benefit in what I've had to tell you. Look, necessity this afternoon has kept the need for me to keep that what I've presented at a fairly high level. I'm sure that you understand and appreciate there are some added complexities associated with dealing with queries about redundancies. I've set out my contact details here. If you have any specific situations or you'd like some guidance or assistance, I'm happy to help. I'll be providing my presentation to Greg, and I'm happy to Gary, and I'll be more than happy for him to provide that to others. But thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Jonathan, and very, very comprehensive. And as Jonathan said, his presentation, his PowerPoint presentation, and the PowerPoint presentations from all three presenters today will be available. So you just need to contact us. We'll be sending out an email to everybody tomorrow with the recording of today's seminar and the link for where you can download those presentations if you wish to have each of those presentations So thank you again, Jonathan. If you can take your presentation down, and I now will invite our third presenter today. And as I said to everyone at the beginning, Greg Weiss is a new partner for the association from Career 365, and we're delighted to have him as part of our team. And Greg wants to talk about, well, if you've made the decision that staff have to be made redundant, how do you manage that for them? So welcome, Greg Weiss.
Thanks very much, Garen. I'm delighted to be here with you all. So now that the decision has been made, the difficult decision has been made to make one of your staff redundant, then there's an unusual term called outplacement, and that's what we specialise in. And purely and simply, outplacement is the support and training to an ongoing employee in order to assist them with their career transition. And about 6 or 7 years ago, after a couple of decades involved in the human resources side of things, I decided to form Career 365 in order to be able to provide this type of support for people who sadly are in between things. And what we did was we decided to make it accessible to people no matter where they are, whether they're in non-urban locations or urban locations. And little did we realise that our delivery system of online would actually be perfectly suitable for COVID environments. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about that, but let me just take you through a little bit about what this is. Sorry, just a slight technical thing. Also, I need to be able to mention that I'm part of a block here, and whilst I'm working from home, there has been some drilling going on, so hopefully you can hear me quite clearly. So what are the business benefits of being socially responsible around providing outplacement? And that is that letting go with responsibility, letting your people go with responsibility and empathy. And so as an employer, you have a social responsibility in your social license to operate, and letting people go with responsibility and empathy, knowing that in fact you are part of the community. It also, frankly, does some real benefits for you in terms of making you in your community a workplace that is desirable to work with. It also, providing outplacement, provides an improved brand image, or at least retains your brand image, and it certainly increases productivity, it's by the remaining staff. So you've got a business, you've got a club that continues to want to operate, and how well you look after your departing employees is not only important to the people who are leaving, but also to the friends and colleagues and other teammates who remain behind. And there's a lot of research that shows that when people see that their colleagues have been well looked after, there's a very high engagement level. Your outplacement, so outplacement is an important and is an integral part to your social license to operate, because as you'd appreciate, it would minimize negative backlash in the community. It helps surviving employees remain engaged. It's easier to re-engage staff members. So you may need to let people go, or maybe too many people to let go. And please, let's hope that things improve in this pandemic environment, and that business conditions are such that they will improve eventually, and that basically would mean that you might have people who you'd like to bring back, and those people have far faster productivity improvements and the like. They go quicker up the learning curve because their experience is very high. And so what we call re-engaging or re-employing people are called boomerang employees. And so those boomerang employees will come back very, very willingly if you've looked after them well in the first place. So if you've given them some care on the way out, there is an opportunity to bring people back in, and that's an important point. And then the important thing also is around the strong brand image for the future, for future talent. If people within your community know that you've looked after people, despite the hardship that the club's going through at this particular point in time, that a strong brand image will certainly say to people, you know what, these guys operate in a decent way. It's a great place to work, and they behaved really incredibly well during these difficult times. If you look at the byline in our logo, and that is, it starts strong, finish strong, there are strong psychological principles about people remembering the first thing you do and the very last thing you do. What goes on in the middle is not so important. It's important, but it's not as important. So the last impressions count as much as first impressions. And so when you're looking after people without outplacement, if you treat people well, then the point is that people are going to feel at least you've done the right thing by them. Moving through quickly here, how outplacement actually operates for the staff affected. So with us, if you got to that difficult point where you needed to let people go, we have a very easy to deploy same day setup. You would just get in touch with us directly. We would make sure that what we'd be doing is reinforcing your employer brand and values. And then what we do is we transition on to looking after client confidentiality, namely being the person with whom we're supporting. And what we provide is a phenomenal amount of utility of 365 days access to a program. Typically, most outplacement companies will provide maybe a week, maybe a month. Ours is a whole year. And in that, what I've done is, as the founder of the company, I've put in continually improving content on there. And so that there are 8 bundles of modules that answer all the questions that people ask. And then typically what will happen is that they'll be interacting with their coach around how they could find another place to shine. It may require, in one of our modules, requires career recalibration, realignment. We can help them discover where else they can use their skills and their knowledge and their competencies to go somewhere else. Because the reality has it that this environment is going to be under a lot of pressure due to physical/social distancing. We provide everything online. We coach via Zoom. We provide webinars almost every week, and participants have a phenomenal amount. People go through our program, what we call participants have a phenomenal amount of support from other people going through the same situation, but also from a coaching network. So Gary's going to facilitate some questions. I'm more than happy to answer those, but by and large, outplacement is a way that you can demonstrate your duty of care. I wrote recently something, and I'd like to be able to read to this, and I guess it summarizes things by saying, by guiding exiting employees through the difficult process of being redundant or retrenched, outplacement can reduce stress, fear and anxiety, all the more important in the environment of a global pandemic, to keep them motivated and equip them with the skills and training they need to succeed in their career transition. By providing support in the form of an outplacement program, it can ensure that the relationship between exiting employees and your club remains positive and amicable, reducing the chance of bad feelings and negative feedback being spread throughout the community. Supporting staff members with an effective outplacement program demonstrates your club's commitment to acting responsibly towards members of its community and shows a dedication to upholding your brand values at every stage of the employee life cycle. So providing outplacement, therefore, helps to maintain your social license to operate and ensures that you are doing the right thing by members of the community in which you operate. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Greg. Very, very well said. We've had some excellent presentations today and some very important information provided to all of you on this issue. It is a very difficult issue, and it's not something that any of us want to be involved with. We would rather keep all our team, but the reality is the business environment is going to continue to be quite difficult and we need to be, unfortunately, doing the analysis and having to make some hard decisions. And I'm hoping that the information you've heard today from Greg Russell, from Jonathan Corlett, and from Greg Weiss will be able to help you through that process. As I said to you, this presentation, this webinar will be available from our website tomorrow. It'll be uploaded, and you'll be able to share it with other people if they wish to watch it. And all three presenters' PowerPoint slides will be also available if you wish to download them. I'd like to thank our three presenters, and please note the contact information for the three of them there, for Greg, Jonathan and Greg Weiss, if you need to contact them. There's their email address and their mobile phone number. All three presenters will be very happy to receive a contact from you if you've got any questions or follow-up matters that you wish to make. Next week, in 2 weeks' time, our next presentation is on club amalgamations, the things that clubs need to consider, either if you are looking at possibly being a child club or being a parent club. This presentation next week will be very important for you in 2 weeks' time, I should say, on Wednesday, the 12th of August. And I remind you again that all of our previous webinars are available on our website, rslservicesclubs.com.au. You can go back to all of them and have a look at them and download them and share them. And there's been quite a different array of topics that we've covered in those webinars. But thank you all again for your participation and your attendance here today. Thank you to our three presenters for your very valuable information and insights. And I look forward to joining you all again in 2 weeks' time. So good afternoon.